Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I've chosen William Ury and Roger Fisher's Getting to Yes as my book to present to you all today. Often when people think of negotiation, they often think of a bunch of people in suits sitting around a table brooding, trying not to show emotion because they want to take the person on the other side of the table for as much money as they possibly can. This book kind of tries to challenge and move outside of those stereotypes of negotiation by focusing on what they call integrative bargaining, which I think many people know the buzzword like a win-win situation. So how do we get to these win-win situations? I'm going to focus on kind of just 4 principles that he talks about that kind of underlie a lot of the book. They are to separate the people from the problem, to focus on interests over positions, to kind of create multiple options or solutions, and then finally to use objective criteria to evaluate those options. So what does it mean to separate people from the problems? I think often if we look at even in a Japan situation where people are arguing back and forth over the Senkaku Islands, it's often it's us versus them, it's China versus Japan, or even in Japan it's like Ishihara versus the government. What William Ury's strategy would try to do is look at the underlying interests behind that. So we'd say, okay, why is it suddenly so important for China to assert themselves? And maybe asserting themselves is that they want to strengthen their own government's position right now in the eyes of the world and in the eyes of their own people. So that shows the kind of one of the possible underlying interests that China might have, just to show that they do have control over the situation. And we know, I think, from the Prime Minister of Japan, one of the things he wanted to do at the time, it was Kano Noda, he wanted to, he wanted to, to kind of show that Japan's actually has control over these Senkaku Islands, which is why he, I think, had a fisherman arrested not too long ago. And that was kind of one of the reasons everything kind of exploded about 3 years ago. So, right, that's the first step, is to kind of look what are these underlying interests. The second is to, once we have those interests, is to focus on them as opposed to their positions. So at the bargaining table, what that would mean is instead of saying, well, China did this first, and Japan did this first, and China did that, we would just say, okay, well, what do we really want? So if that means they want fishing rights, then we focus on fishing rights. If that means they want to build something, then we focus on what they want to build. So by focusing specifically on what people want to do, we can get past the whole argument over what's necessarily happened in the past, and to focus more on what's going to happen in the future. And so in that process, we might come up with all sorts of different options and ideas. And William Ury's one of the things he likes to emphasize is that we have to create multiple options. Because often if we just have 2 options, or 1 option, and we're like, well, that's not going to work. I'm not going to spend hours trying to talk about this plan if in the end it's not going to work. So he really wants to stress creating multiple options. And what that requires is that during the brainstorming phase, there has to be no judgment. So if a Chinese negotiator is there, he has to feel free to say, well, it's simple, we just blow up Japan and that's it. And put that on the board, okay, fine, it's an option, we don't have to go with it. And then finally at the end, would blowing up Japan really help your economy in the future? Probably not. So they can judge that. And that's why it's also important to have objective criteria. So if we're looking at in world international relationships, we'd be good looking at a criteria developed by the UN or criteria done by a union of different Asian countries to focus on what's important for the relationships between all the countries involved, and use that as kind of our backing board. So instead of China thinks this, the world thinks that. って感じ。
って感じ。
Any questions?
Difficult.
So, according to that book, how would you use the method or the technique in your daily life?
I think one thing I tried to do is the very first one is separating the people from the problems. And I think in my own family life, where I have, like, say, my mother is this kind of person, my sister is this kind of person, these kind of personalities have kind of been a source of conflict in my own family. And so one thing I tried to do is like, okay, for example, my older brother, what do I want from him? I was like, I want him to feel that he can rely on me, that I want him to know that I love him and his son and his wife, and I want to have a relationship with him. So by focusing on that interest, I can write him a letter, I can call him up, and I can create that. But if I was just thinking about the position, I'd be thinking, my brother never writes, he's not that kind of person, so why should I write back? And I'd be reacting to that position. So I can focus more just on what I need to do, and what my own personal interests are.
If there are many options, isn't it more difficult to make a final decision?
And often when you have lots of options, it does make the choice more difficult. So often once you created a lot of options, you'll try to choose some that look better, and then within each options, what you want to do to find the best one is look for opportunities for what they say mutual gain. So if, for example, one of the options was for the senkaku, say, is that we were going to share fishing rights, and then they say, okay, well, what if our company has processing facilities on the ships, so why don't you let us do all the fishing, and we'll give you a share of the processed fish for like a cheap price. So maybe the fishing company makes extra money in Japan, and the Chinese company is getting cheap canned fish that they don't have to process, or vice versa. So that's like one idea where you could try to find how do we, which of these huge options has the most potential for these kind of mutual gains.
Thank you.